on setting. All right. The question of the day is, does it matter where and when a story is set? That's really what we want to know when we're talking about setting. All right. So the brief version of setting is the where and when of a story, right? This can be precise, something like the summer of 1969 in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco, right? Precise. Or it can be vague, a high school somewhere suburban in the modern era. And it can be real or it can be fictional, right? So Garden Heights is not a real place. The Hate U Give is a fictionalized community, but it's realistic in that it's one that we all could recognize, right? Okay, so the two basic kinds of settings. The first one is called integral, and an integral setting is when it positions the reader in a specific time and place that you need to make that story complete, right? That the whether or not the setting is real, it's shaping the course of events in the story, and that they wouldn't happen the way they happen unless they were in this setting, right? So an integral setting, the word integral means part of. It means that without this setting, the story really didn't happen. It wouldn't make sense. So let's think about some examples of this kind of setting, right? An example, if you've ever seen Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Johnny Depp did one not too long ago that's really good. Without Wonderland, the strange characters and the inexplicable events just couldn't take place, right? Like, unless she's in Wonderland, which is a fictional setting, it's not a real place, the story doesn't make sense, right? Because the whole world doesn't operate the same way that Alice's Wonderland does. It's an integral setting. The Great Gatsby is another integral setting. They made a good movie about that recently. Leonardo DiCaprio was in it. It depends on the social environment of the 1920s and the activities that were common to people living in Long Island and New York City, right? They had huge parties. It was bootlegging was happening, right? So there had to be that experience. So they take this author, Ernesto Quiñones, wrote a book called Bodega Dreams that's a takeoff on The Great Gatsby. It's actually the same story, but it had to be set in a similar social world. It had to be someplace that allowed for the character of Bodega to be similar to Gatsby and to respond to their setting in the same way. So, right, The Great Gatsby is set in 1920s when it was illegal to buy and sell alcohol, and Gatsby made his money as an illegal alcohol salesman, a bootlegger. Bodega, set in the 1980s during the crack era, makes his money as a crack dealer, right? So both are using the same kind of, I am making my money through illegal means, but both also have dreams of making themselves bigger and social arising. All right. Oh, another example before I go on, another example of an integral setting you may know is The Hunger Games, right? So The Hunger Games is a fictional story set in a fictional future where the world is a society that has this game. If that world didn't exist, that wouldn't make any sense, right? Like, we don't put our young people in arenas and watch them kill each other. You have to have that setting for that story to make sense. All right. So if it's not a integral setting, we call it a backdrop setting. And a backdrop is literally just something you put behind you, right? It's a basic setting that does not shape the events of the story. It's not affected, right? So if you move this story to a different time and place, it's the same exact story, and it doesn't rely on any elements of the setting, any era, any elements of the era to make it make sense. So Romeo and Juliet is our classic backdrop setting. The story works the same in a variety of settings. In fact, this story is changed and put in new settings all the time. I've seen it so many times, so many ways. Changing the setting for this story just adds a fun element, but it doesn't actually change it, right? So the original was set in the 1500s in Verona, Italy. There's a film that was made in 1997 where he takes the exact same script and just puts it in modern Mexico City, and it still works. The musical West Side Story is the same Romeo and Juliet story set in New York in the 1960s with songs. And then in 2012, they came up with this Romeo and Juliet, which is a garden full of gnomes, animated for kids. So the story stays the same, right? No matter where it is set. So the question for you is, the hate you give. Is it an integral setting or a backdrop setting? And how do you know?